Welcome to our AJA Lunchtime Live, Navigating Divides and Polarization with Irshad Manji. I'm Kimberly Carroll, folks, and I want to welcome all you sweet souls here with us live, and welcome to those of you who are watching the replay. As if our work as animal advocates wasn't challenging enough, folks, we're also in the era of polarization. So many people are here today because they're at a loss about how to reach people in these divided times. So it's a good thing we have Irshad here today. Irshad is the founder of Moral Courage College, which equips people worldwide with the tools to turn heated issues into healthy conversations and sustained relationships. Irshad is also a New York Times bestselling author. Her latest book, Don't Label Me, is about how to unify people who've got divergent, even clashing views. The book is written as a feisty conversation between Irshad and her dog, Lily, a tribute to Irshad's love for the intelligence of all sentient beings. A longtime professor of leadership at New York University, Irshad now teaches with Oxford University's Initiative for Global Ethics and Human Rights. We're very lucky to have this person's time today, this lovely being's time. She is also a human I've known for over 20 years, if you can believe it, Irshad, and whom I adore. Welcome, my friend.
Oh, and we are friends. We've been friends for so long, Kimberly, and I've watched you blossom, over the
Mm,
past 20, 25 years. I remember when we hung out in Toronto as young bucks, and
yeah.
here we are, mature, presumably wiser, but no less passionate for, what we need to do with a very broken world. So thank you again for being a friend of mine over the years. And you know how much your own approach to advocacy has influenced me. I only wish that I took it more seriously years ago when I made some of my mistakes in activism. But, I'll get to that in a moment. Everyone, thanks again for being here. And let me begin, if I may, with what I think is kind of a fascinating fact about polarization today. You'll never hear this, in the media or from folks who are consumed with media, the very online folks. But this is true. It is not that we as people disagree on the major issues. There's actually a surprising amount of consensus on the big issues of our day. What we disagree with about rather is each other, meaning we don't trust each other. And so we don't engage each other in meaningful ways, which, now think about this, only deepens the distrust and distracts us from making progress on all that we already agree about.
Mm.
Not to put too fine a point on it, but that's crazy making because it's of our own making, these divides. And often, we activists, we contribute to that. Let me explain by telling you my own humbling story. Some of you may know I was living in Canada at the time. Years ago, I came out with a book about the need for reform in my religion of Islam. And I knew that I would be taking it on the chin for writing a book like this. And so I listened to a voice inside of me that I honestly thought was the voice of conscience. In fact, it was the voice of ego. And that ego told me, Irshad, for all kinds of reasons, you're going to be attacked for coming out with this book. You're, and this was true at the time, young, you're a woman, you're queer, you're raised in the West. And for all of those reasons, many of your fellow Muslims will tell you that you are at best inauthentic and more likely you are corrupt. Don't let them intimidate you into silence. When you are verbally or otherwise punched, be sure to counterpunch so that they know you mean business, that you're not going to be silenced. And that's exactly what I did over and over again. I had a tendency to turn what could have been healthy discussions with my detractors into toxic debates. win-lose, us against them. 3 things happened as a result. 1, my detractors became more dogmatic and defensive because I kept doing this. 2, my supporters began to be suspicious. Is she in this to move the needle? Or is she in this to play gotcha? And maybe worst of all, this antagonistic approach to my activism did a number on my nervous system. At the worst possible time, in case that's when these things happen, I went into a seizure publicly. I had already been having panic attacks. I fell into a deep clinical depression, but I still soldiered on. And that's when my body seized up. Not unlike the body politic that we're all experiencing, both in the United States and Canada today. And during that time of recovery, I needed to ask myself a really uncomfortable question. Why is it that I get so defensive when all that's happening is that I'm being disagreed with? Now, admittedly, I'm being disagreed with on something that I'm passionate about, but what's with my own closed-mindedness? How can I convince others to be open-minded when I meet them like they're obstacles in my path? And I did a ton of reading on neuroscience, cognitive psychology, behavioral economics, basically how we are wired as human beings. And that's when I learned, this is the good news, I actually didn't have to change my convictions in order to live a flourishing life of impact. All I needed to change was how I communicated what I believed. And communicate it in a way that lowers my emotional defenses and motivates others to lower theirs. And so, Kimberly, I'm just going to put a finishing flourish on this story.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how I knew that I had learned that lesson. Towards the end of my recovery, I actually got an invitation from Al Jazeera International, the TV station. Get this, they invited me to engage in a debate about whether Islam really does need reform. And, you know, since debate is what got me in this mess in the first place, of course I said, sure. But I said that, I assure you, not because I couldn't help myself. I said it because I needed to test myself. Since I'd become so good at turning potential discussions into noxious debates, could I do the reverse? And so, in order to prepare for this, I made a few emotional agreements with myself. I said, Irshad, remember, the person who's debating with you or wants to debate with you, yeah, he's your adversary. Yes, he's your rival, but that doesn't mean he's evil. Second, when he makes a good point, acknowledge it. There is no shame in recognizing that somebody other than you has a point of view that's worth considering. Third, this is going to be public. It's before a live audience. So when you're asked a question from the audience that you don't have a ready response for, that's okay. Take a breath, slow yourself down. And finally, even as you process that question, if you still don't have an answer that you can stand by, ask the questioner. How would they have you think about the issue? What's their advice? It's a mark of humility when you allow someone to become your teacher rather than assuming that the only person in this conversation that can do the schooling is you. And here's what happened. I remembered all of those emotional agreements during the so-called debate. After the cameras shut off, I ran outside and up to the reception room. I just was too nervous about what kind of a reception I would receive to want to stick around and have people engage with me right away. And so I grabbed a glass of water upstairs, and not 2 minutes later, a bunch of theologians in their beards and their robes walk in. And I'm thinking, here we go. And they said to me, "You're not the Irshad Manji we were expecting." And I'm like, okay, say more. They said, "Tonight, you showed humility. And so we know that we won't be feeding your ego when we tell you. We actually agree with a lot of what you're advocating." Remember how I said at the top of this presentation, Kimberly, that it's not that we, the people, disagree profoundly on issues, it's that we don't trust each other? That's exactly what I learned in that moment. They had agreed with most of what I was advocating for all along, but they never would have let me know that had I not grabbed just enough humility to lower my emotional defenses and motivate them to lower theirs.
Well, and may I add, they probably wouldn't have even heard you, Irshad. If they didn't get the sense that you were an open, sort of humble person, they would have been like, I don't hear you. She's the enemy. Nothing she
And
says, I'm gonna,
exactly. And
yeah.
that's what had happened over 10 years. I literally said to them, "You realize that I have been almost literally dying to hear this over the past decade." But again, I would have never known that I have allies who are willing to advocate this point of view to their own congregations if I hadn't been willing to adopt a healing approach to my advocacy. And so here's the bottom line. Listening to your so-called other doesn't have to mean losing to your so-called other. You know why? Because if you refuse to frame your engagement as win-lose, then there's nothing to lose. The win is in what you learn from them, and as a result, what you now have a chance to have them learn from you.
I love that. And Irshad, so just folks, just so you know, Irshad's gonna share even more sort of more presentation style, and then we're gonna have more questions. But Irshad, I just have to throw in, one more thing around that is you're taking the approach of not just sort of clinching that one experience. Your approach is all about how us as a society, we need to build more healthy relationships.
Correct.
So instead of just looking at, I need to get them to know this now, I need them to admit defeat now, it's like maybe we could have this conversation and then the next person they talk to would be more open to hearing this.
That's
We're
right.
building, like we're scattering seeds here. We're not asking to, harvest everything right away.
Exactly. Exactly. And look, culture change, which is ultimately what the advocacy of animal rights is, it's about culture change. In fact, it's bigger than culture change. It's really species change, our species. This is the hardest change to make. And so we're deluding ourselves, Kimberly, if we think that we can actually make this change and make it sustainable with overnight win-lose, tactics. And here's the other thing I can't emphasize enough. Remember, I wound up in the emergency room as a result of both feeding and ingesting all of this poisonous energy. What good are you doing to your own nervous system if you feel the need to constantly be putting people in their place? Because you have it right and they have it wrong. It may very well be that you have it right and they have it wrong. But if you believe that your role is to always call out others, I guarantee you are putting your nervous system through a shredder. And ultimately, it's you are damaging, and along the way, the cause that you are damaging.
The gotcha approach is a killer.
It's a killer.
Yeah.
It's an express train to burnout.
Mm. All right, so Irshad, you are going to tell us about, first of all, some of the neuroscience behind this. And so let's go with that first, and then I'm going to get you to share some really practical tools with us, okay?
I want you all to understand that the story I told you is not a one-off. The reason I dove into the neuroscience and cognitive psychology behind all of this is precisely because I was at my wit's end. The wick had burned, and I needed to know what to do next. And what I learned is that all of us, bar none, are born with a brain that has a primitive region right behind the ears. Do this if you can, just to remind yourself, tap that part of your head right behind the ears. This is where the ego brain resides. And we call it at Moral Courage the ego brain because it's that part of the brain that is scanning for threat. You ready for this? 5 times a second. Not a minute, 5 times a second. Of course, it serves a purpose, the ego brain. If there is a bus hurtling towards me, that's the part of the brain that will say to me, get out of the way or get ready to fight, right? That's the fight or flight or freeze mode. And in life and death situations, the ego brain is our best friend. But in every other situation, it's our frenemy. Because it manipulates us into believing that merely being disagreed with is an attack. And so we are stressed enough, thanks to the ego brain, to want to lash back, which then prevents us from being understood because we are preventing ourselves from understanding others. So what I'm teaching here, my friends, is not about the need to be nice. It's not even about being civil. Honestly, I'll just be very upfront. I dislike the word civility. It almost trivializes the point because this is not about, avoiding your need to disrupt behavioral patterns. No, we can be productively disruptive without being wantonly destructive. And that's the sweet spot. And so, Kimberly, what I want to teach everybody are skills, very, very simple skills to lower our own emotional defenses so that we can motivate others to lower theirs. And in that way, we're actually using our power, our agency, to create the culture of the conversation.
I love these 5 skills, Irshad, and we're going to bring up the your PowerPoint, some slides for this. And I love, I've seen you speak of these, and they seem very simple, but so powerful, right?
Yep.
Like they're simple, and but the power of them is incredible. So I'm
Right.
going to pass it on to you to talk more about that.
Folks, I got so animated by being in this webinar that I completely forgot to just let you know why the skills that I am now going to teach are skills of moral courage, right? And let me just stop on this slide for a second. Read this carefully. Moral courage means speaking truth to power in here, even as you speak your truth to power out there. You know, the popular definition of moral courage is speak truth to power. Okay, but how you speak your truth is really important because, again, if you're doing this, you're not going to be heard. Instead, we've got to speak truth to our ego brains. And that truth is, ego, I love and respect you. I know that you exist for a good reason, to keep me alive. And I'm grateful for that. But in this moment, all that's happening is I'm being disagreed with. I'm not going to die. So ego, step aside. I got this. Moral courage, speaking truth to power in here, even as you speak your truth to power out there, so that you have the best chance of being heard. All right. Each skill will help you lower your emotional defenses. And one more point. I want you to know, everybody, that the 5 skills that we're about to learn are not steps. Okay? I'm not asking you to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in a row. That's too much. As I'm teaching you these skills, ask yourself, which one can I commit to habituating? Can I commit to practicing so regularly that it becomes a habit? And the beauty of turning any one of these skills into a habit is when it's a habit, it's a no-brainer, which means that it's painless. It's just who you are and how you roll. And that'll make practicing these skills in times of high emotion second nature. All right, are we ready? The first skill is to breathe and breathe deeply. When we as humans are anxious, we tend to breathe in a very shallow way. And you know what I found out about myself, Kimberly? I stopped breathing, period.
Oh, yeah.
Which was really stupid
Yeah.
because I prevented my brain from getting the oxygen that it needs in order to size up what's going on in front of me, right? And so I had a tendency to overreact. I would think of somebody saying something that triggered me as if it was a catastrophe. And so I'd be, "Mwah." It's not a catastrophe. At worst, it's a setback, and I can get over it. But I need to train my ego brain to understand that. And so taking a deep breath or 2 before you enter into a conversation that could go sideways is a really important thing to do. You're slowing down the blood rush in your body, and you're telegraphing to your ego that it's okay to move from the hyper emotional state to a state here where feeling and thinking can coexist. So that's skill number 1. Breathe deeply. Okay, skill number 2. Don't merely seek common ground. Who the hell has the time to be seeking common ground today? No, be proactive. Create it. First of all, why common ground? I know it seems obvious, but I'll spell it out. Common ground builds trust. And without a sliver of trust, we can't discuss our differences productively. So this is a trust building exercise, okay? And the way you can create common ground is to say something like this. Hey, Kimberly, I have a feeling we're probably going to disagree about this issue. But I also have a feeling that you are so much more than just this issue. There's all kinds of really interesting things about you that I don't know. And so I'm not here to judge who you are based on the conversation we're about to have. I'm not here to judge. Can you remember the same about me? That I'm more than this conversation too? And unless that person is a jerk who's in this conversation in bad faith, and if that's what they are, if they say to you, hell no, of course I'm going to judge you, idiot, you know that this person is not worth your breath and you can thank them and move on. But 9 times out of 10, the person will be breathing a sigh of relief that you're not here to judge them. Because here's the truth. There is one thing more than death itself that we humans fear, and that is judgment. Judgment for which we have not signed up. So nip that fear in the bud. Create common ground. Skill number 3, again, this is a standalone skill. You don't have to do 1 and 2 in order to get to this one. Before making statements about what you believe, ask a sincere question about what your so-called other believes. And you might think that the important word here is question. Actually, the equally important word is sincere. Once again, I come back to being judgy, right? We humans have an uncanny ability to be judgy even when we tell ourselves, oh, I'm not judgy. For example, if I was to say to you, Kimberly, do you have any idea what it means to say what you just said? Do you have any clue the impact of that? Now, notice that, sure, there's a question at the end of that statement. I'm thinking it's a question. It's a statement.
Yeah, you know what it makes me feel, Irshad? Do you know that you're a piece of shit?
Exactly.
That's what it makes
That's
me
exactly
think
right.
you're asking. Yeah.
Nice question, right? Do you know that you're a piece of shit? Nice
Yeah.
question. It's not a question, obviously. It's an accusation. And so you are going to make the other instantly defensive if your question is not sincere. A sincere question could be, hey, Kimberly, can you help me understand what I might be missing about where you're coming from? Notice that I might be missing something, not you. So I need you to let me know what you think I might be missing. Or ask about a personal experience. Have you had a personal experience that shapes the way you think and feel about this? Oh, you have. Tell me more. When people know that you care about their backstory, they are much more inspired to care about yours. People want to know, not that you just care about the issue. That's obvious, but that you also care about them. That's why the question has to be sincere.
Okay, so Irshad, can I jump in? Because Jeannie
Yeah.
is asking something that I'm sure some people are thinking. She's saying, how do I change my inner dialogue so that I'm not even thinking that? So, because in order for it to be sincere, you can't be thinking, well, I actually think this person's a piece of shit, but I'm going to ask a question. So how do you make it sincere? How do you get to the point where the sincerity?
And John B. literally answered the question for me.
Yeah.
It comes with practice. You see, you've got to tame your own ego brain so that you're not immediately coming from a place of judgment. Now, I'm not here to say that ultimately you can't judge people. We're human. We're gonna judge. The difference is that you're not here to prejudge. Notice that phrase, prejudge. When you put it together, what do you get? Prejudice. And that's what we have when we prejudge people. And yes, Andrew, you can have love for a jerk, because some jerks are jerks because of their own scars, their own wounds. And you can understand a little bit more about where they're coming from when you ask them about their backstory, not about the issue, but about what they've experienced in their lives that has shaped how they're thinking and feeling about this particular issue. And remember, by the way, everybody, just as much as we may think so-and-so is a jerk, they probably feel the same about us because of the way we are engaging with them. All right? So let's puncture our own, egomaniacal approaches to communicating. Go ahead.
Yeah, and Irshad, I was just going to throw one more thing in there. Even if we decide that person's behavior is too jerky for us to actually work with in any way, we can still have love and understanding in their heart that if they could do better, they would. They're not capable of doing better at this moment. And
that's the key this moment.
At this moment. Yes.
That is absolutely the key. I don't mind telling all of you, and maybe I'll get into trouble for saying this, but that's cool. Push back during the Q&A. I was at a university a couple of weeks ago and leading an event about the messy truths between two extreme positions on Israel-Palestine. Okay, it was about the messy truths in between. And there was a cohort of pro-Palestine activists who showed up just to blow up the space. They weren't there to respect the purpose of the event. They were there to assert there are no messy truths. It's right versus wrong. And towards the end, I told them, I think tonight was a really big missed opportunity for all of you. When you shame and blame and demean people for not already being on side with you, you actually stop yourselves from being heard. Intimidating is not motivating. And compliance is not care. And so I hope you all remember as you go forward in your good work, because I want you to be heard, I hope you remember that how you do what you do matters at least as much as what you are trying to do. Now, Kimberly, they weren't ready to hear that. But you know who was? Almost everybody else in that room, the witnesses. And a number of them came up to me afterwards to say, I needed to hear that because I think I've become too closed. My heart has become too closed. And so thank you for reminding me that when I communicate with moral courage, speaking truth to the power of the ego brain, I'm actually setting myself up to be heard.
Yeah, and so Irshad, Roger Yates here is asking, saying, oh, sorry, I lost you, Roger. Yes, I have a hard time in terms of messy truth when it comes to genocide. Now, just, to make it clear, because you told me this story the other day, you actually provided an opportunity, like a platform for the folks to have a discussion about this.
That's
and they
exactly
actually
right.
They backed out and they said, no, there's no discussing here.
That's right.
And so that's where it
Yeah.
absolutely, we all here believe very firmly in like not being cruel to other humans. Like that's the
right.
bottom line of everybody here. We're just discussing how it is that you can interface with people in a way that we don't get further divided, but that we can start to understand each other.
And this is what, again, I think we miss when we stay in reactive mode, is that for any change to happen, whether it is ending a genocide or of humans or ending a genocide of non-humans, animal rights, we need to develop buy-in. We can't just have our own side, imposing solutions on everybody else, because they're not solutions. Solutions solve. And if imposition ripens the people being imposed upon to take revenge when they're in power. Okay? So
Yeah.
that so-called solution doesn't last. And so this is part of why it's so important to do what I had to do during my period of recovery from that seizure. Ask ourselves a basic question. Am I in this to move the needle? Or am I in this to feel morally superior? I'm not asking anyone to pronounce their answer from a mountaintop. No, that's for you to answer for yourself. But understand that whatever your answer is, that will shape how you show up. Okay, so
Okay, I took you off track. So let's go back to your, let's take,
all good. This is a conversation.
Amazing.
So I'm happy to, go back and forth. This brings us to skill number 4. Now that you've asked a sincere question, you're going to listen, right? Maybe not. Are you going to listen to learn? That's the key. Now, we've all heard, listen to understand. Guess what? That's not enough. And here's why. That principle has become such a cliche, listen to understand, that we actually have a cliche way of enacting it. If all I'm doing, Kimberly, is listening to understand you, I'm going to say, oh, yeah, I hear you. Oh, yeah, I hear you. And then I'll jump back into my own agenda. I haven't heard you. I've used the right language to convince myself that I have, but I haven't heard you. Instead, we've got to do something more proactive. Listen to learn. And that means saying something like, Kimberly, thank you. Because honestly, I would have never come up with that interpretation myself. Now, in the back of your head, you might thinking, I would have never come up with that interpretation myself because it is, crazy town, right? But when you can be really specific about why you're grateful, that means that you're telegraphing, I'm hearing you. And you can add to it, I'm not sure I agree. In fact, I've got more questions for you, but thank you for giving me more to think about. Research shows that we humans, we don't actually crave being agreed with. We crave being heard. The same region of our brain lights up when we know we're being heard as we know we're being agreed with. And people don't need others to say, you're so right. They need others to say, thank you for sharing that with me. I now understand more because, and then fill in the blank.
Mind blown on that one, Irshad. That is so good to know.
And this is why, everybody, it's really important to understand that the skills of moral courage don't mean compromising what you believe, not at all. In fact, there's a delicious paradox at the heart of all of this, that you can at one and the same time stand your ground and create common ground simultaneously. Standing your ground is about what you believe. That's part of your integrity. Brilliant. Creating common ground is about how you express what you believe. So if you can leave your so-called other feeling respected, heard, then you will have motivated them to hear you in turn when the time is right. Planting those seeds, as you put it, right? We're all farmers at the end of the day.
But not animal farmers.
Not animal farmers. No, ma'am. No, ma'am. We're planting and, taking the long view, right, to harvest, what we're planting. Okay. Yeah. So that brings us to the final skill of moral courage for today's webinar. Ask another question, starting with 3 simple words. Tell me more. You can understand why this phrase is so inviting. It's thoroughly unassuming, and it conveys, you can still trust me. You've still got the floor. I'm still listening. Tell me more. So easy to remember, except if you don't turn that into a habit, then when emotions are raging, you're not going to remember it. And that's why John B's point earlier in the chat about practice, practice, practice is so important. I'm going to suggest we think of moral courage as a skill set. It's not a noble principle. It's not for the Mandelas and the Gandhis and the Rosa Parks of this world. It's like playing a sport or a musical instrument or speaking a foreign language. You can know the rules of the sport. You can know the grammar of the foreign language. You can know the physics of the musical instrument, but you can't do any of them well unless you practice, practice, practice. So at the end of today's webinar, Kimberly, give me 2 minutes to ask everybody in the chat one last question about practice, okay? But for now, what I can tell you all, and this is where I'll ask that the one-page tip sheet be offered up in the chat. I'm happy to let you all know that you're gonna be leaving this webinar with a tangible, albeit digital, one-pager, a tip sheet that itemizes all of these 5 skills and gives you context for each of them. And that way, maybe once a week, you'll come back to it and go, okay, I know I'm capable of this.
Maybe even something to check out before you start engaging in an online discussion with somebody when there's a post that you're responding to.
That's
Get that
exactly
tip
right.
sheet out.
Exactly right. You got it. Yeah. And remember, everybody, just one skill, hey? You don't have to do all 5. Take the time, make it manageable, make it doable. Practice, practice, practice just one of the skills that, knowing you as only you do, you know you can integrate into your daily life. For example, remember I told you that I used to stop breathing altogether? I have habituated for myself, breathe deeply. And the way I've done that is, I know, like everybody in this webinar, I'm too busy during the day to stop and remind myself, oh, I've got to practice this skill. So instead, before I roll out of bed, I take 5 deep breaths. That telegraphs to my body, this is how we roll. And trust me when I say, it's gotten me out of more than a few pickles. I love pickles, just not that kind.
Yes. Well, one of a great little mantra I live by, Irshad, is if I have an immediate, really sort of compelling pull to act, it means I absolutely should not. Like
Yeah, right?
if the more that I feel like I need to respond right away, the more I need to step away. Like
Right.
it's an indication that my fight or flight has come in online, and that I am not going to be coming from my full, intelligent, wise, anchored self.
That's right. And let me just say one other thing about all of this. Look, you would think that I would know by now to not come from a place of reaction. Well, guess what? Just the other day, I lost it with my own mother. Okay. But here's what I did immediately afterwards. Immediately afterwards, I asked myself, why did I get so defensive? And I got to the bottom of why. And then I texted my mother to first profusely apologize, and then to let her know that what was really bugging me wasn't the issue itself. It's something deeper. And I said to her, Ma, I will tell you about what that is when I see you next. because I think it requires a face-to-face between the two of us. But for now, please know, I'm so sorry for the tone that I took with you. That wasn't fair to you. I apologize. And, I will explain everything when the time is right. And here's the thing. I went on a trip immediately afterwards for business. And, when I'm on the road, I can't text my mom as quickly or, frequently as I would like. She thought that my silence was still about that fight. And so when she texted me a couple of days later to say, "Are you still mad at me?" I wrote her back immediately saying, "No, like I told you, we're good." But folks, what you need to understand, and this comes right out of marriage counseling, is that for every scarring moment that you help inflict on somebody else, it takes 5 really gracious moments to make up for that. And so the most efficient way, I think, to be an activist who's effective is to prevent yourself from scarring others in the first place. You can always practice moral courage after you have scarred. You can always do that after. Infinitely better to not scar at all.
So Irshad, can I start giving you some questions because there's some things that are coming up. Is that okay? We don't
Yes.
have a lot of time.
Yep.
I mean, I know your time is tight. We could sit here and listen to you for another hour. But one of the questions that Elsa brings up that's really an important one, I think, for this crew. What about if our mere existence as vegans is being perceived as a moral judgment against non-vegans? And this is a thing. I think anybody who's been in the movement for a while, there was a study done, Irshad, where it was ranked that the only people that were more despised in society than drug addicts was vegans.
Wow.
And so there is in like an integrated sort of feeling that are not eating animals or partaking in animal consumerism is a judgment.
Right.
And so any advice around that?
Yeah, the advice is that you don't know who feels threatened by your veganism until you begin to engage. Now, here's the key. Don't engage about veganism. Ask people about their lives. What's the greatest memory that you think about at least once a week from your life? Who has had the most influence on your life? These are open questions that tell you something about them as, fellow human beings, right? And when they see that you should not be reduced to your veganism, however much it is a passion for you, you are more than that, and that you're not reducing them to their non-veganism, that is when the heart opens. When they see, again, I'm going to go back to this beautiful phrase, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. Not about the issue, but about them. Compliance is not care.
So one of the other things, and I think we've sort of covered this, Irshad, but I think one of the big worries for whether you're an animal advocate or any other kind of advocate is that all of the asking of questions and the listening means you're never going to get to share some really vital information. That's especially in animal advocacy, because that information isn't readily out there. Like you might be speaking to somebody who is hearing this information for the first time, and it could literally save lives. It's high stakes when you're talking about 70 billion, sentient beings being tortured in life and death. So what do we do? Is there a way with this technique to be also able to impart information? Or is just that like sometimes we just have to kind of look at it as relationship building and hope that the next person, is able to reach them.
Well, I completely get the urgency of this. What I think we need to get is that information on its own rarely moves anyone. And even more so today, because the question of, well, where'd that information come from? And can that source be trusted? Or more to the point, is that a credible source? In other words, we don't, as people, bother even to ask today, can that source be trusted? Oh, that's where it comes from? Forget it. I already know it's misinformation, right? So your information, however authoritative, however credible, will not be enough to open someone's heart who isn't already on the verge of opening their heart to your point of view. You therefore have to take the longer view and make sure that you are worthy of trust. Remember, we don't disagree about issues as much as we disagree about one another. We don't trust each other. And so, job number one is building trust.
Amazing. Irshad, do you have a few extra minutes that you
I
could
do.
give us?
I
Yeah.
do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because we're still strong here with 120 folks, and there's just some things that we'd like to pick your brain about. So Nisha and Jeremy asked, any thoughts on how to have productive communication when text-based online, especially when there's differing views? So so many of these things that are blowing up are online. They're on social media platforms. So do we do the exact same thing as what you've said, or is there a different way to handle it?
Well, because it's online, you don't have, all the room in the world to get deep into detail. And I would add, there are a couple of things to remember. One is, you tell me if anybody wants to push back on this, you don't have to react to everybody who posts something that you disagree with. Folks, I'm going to say that again. Spare your nervous system the stress of feeling like you have to react. You don't. And in fact, the more you react, the more dogmatic they will become, because that's the oxygen so many what are called conflict entrepreneurs want today, right? Sometimes they just show up to blow up the space. You going to fall for it? So you don't have to react. Number two, for those whom you do feel you want to engage, you can always ask a question, skill number three, and assure people, I'm asking from a place of sincerity, not sarcasm. Because of course, online, you can't read people's body language. You don't know the tone. So people need to be assured that you're coming from a place of good faith here, assuming you are. And if you're not, game over. That's why I say, don't react. I have often, gone back and forth with folks, letting them know that I'm genuinely curious, that, I'm interested in what they have to say, and that I thank them for staying in the conversation. And after about 3 rounds, that's it. I generally wrap it up then. I just want people to know that they're not setting themselves up for humiliation the next time I'm in an online conversation with them. So again, trust building is important, but you don't have to make it last forever, right? Build that trust from the get-go, and you'll come back to that person later on. You know you will. So trust building, I repeat, is job number one.
Irshad, in this era of calling people out, there's a lot of shaming, a lot of canceling. Do you see any alternatives that we can use when there is some truly problematic behavior from an individual happening in a community? Like, how do we not shame, but not sweep it under the rug?
Yeah.
I know
Yeah.
that's a hard question, but you can handle it.
Well, it's a hard question, largely because we human beings are at once complicated and simplistic at the same time, right? Different people will take your efforts to, to help them become more responsive rather than reactive. They'll take those efforts in different ways. And so again, I go back to the activists at the university a couple of weeks ago, right? I told them, listen, I used to be like you guys, and I did damage to my health, and I didn't get heard. And here's the deal. I want you to succeed. I believe in your message. I too want the occupation to end. They knew that I was coming from a place of wanting to support them. And still, they were closed to the notion that maybe they need to change something in themselves. So again, even when you're coming from a place of support, you pull aside somebody in the movement to say, listen, I think this is what's happening. And may I suggest something different so that you have a better chance of success? You're showing them, right, that it's not about disagreeing with them. It's about helping them succeed. And still, they may not be ready. So do what you can from that place of wanting to help them succeed. And then you've got to let it go. You've got to let it go. Because sometimes we do need a swift kick in the ass in order to realize what, Narcotics Anonymous points out, that the definition of absurdity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
Okay, one more question, Irshad, because we're all heading into the holiday season. You folks down in the States, your Thanksgiving on Thursday. And Lane here is saying, do you have any special advice when people accusing you of judgment are family who you love and it starts breaking your family apart? So any specific advice in this approach when it comes to family and it comes to the holidays, all that sort of thing?
Yeah. Well, my friend, you've got a little under 48 hours to practice one of the skills of moral courage. Just one. And when you can bring that to the Thanksgiving table, watch how the dynamic of what you fear will be a confrontation changes into more of a conversation. Okay? In other words, it really is going to be your call between now and Thursday whether you're going to begin to internalize one of these skills. That's a decision you've got to make. And so this brings me, Kimberly, to the question that I have for everybody who is still on the call. Folks, which one of the 5 skills are you committing to practicing now? And practicing it so regularly that it becomes a habit over the next few weeks, right? You see that emoticon, on the screen here, emoticon of me with a soccer ball, bon voyage, playing electric guitar. All of these are skill sets. And so is moral courage. It is a set of skills. And all of them require practice in order to be fluent. So which one? Breathe deeply, create common ground proactively, ask a sincere question, listen to learn, not merely to understand, and tell me more.
Okay, I actually want to see that in the chat, folks.
Exactly right.
And maybe Ina, go to the one the screen before this so that they can
Right.
see it in
That
bigger.
brings up that can bring up B.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, so being able to say which one, you can say 2, 3. Okay, yeah, amazing. So we're getting deep breathing.
Beautiful.
We're
Listen
getting,
to learn.
yeah,
Excellent. Remember, listen
creating
to learn
ground.
means thank you because, right? That's how you show
Yeah,
that you're listening to learn. Someone actually chose 2. Rock on. Skill 3
yeah.
and skill 5. Breathe. And Shelley, remember, breathe deeply, right? That's the
Mhm.
key.
Yeah,
Ian says, listen to learn. Anybody
yeah,
for create common ground? I haven't seen that.
yeah.
Oh, there we
Tammy
go.
said,
Tammy,
yeah.
thank you. Create common ground. It's not about seeking common ground. It's about proactively creating it. And that tip sheet, which I hope you've all downloaded, tells you how you can create common ground. The
Mhm.
sincere questions, 3 of them are offered up in that tip sheet, how you can begin a conversation with a sincere question. And tell me more is I think the easiest one to remember, and it is often the most impactful.
Mm.
So
So I'm just going to say, you have on your screen right now, you see 2 women who have been incredibly feisty debaters
yes,
in their past.
that's
I
right.
mean, we can still debate, but again, the way that we do it is just so different, and it's something that I agree with. It's all about practice. I've been practicing for many years. It's really great to be able to watch people that are practicing it and take some notes around it. There are some people out there that I really watch, and I'm like, oh, the way they did that, this like beautiful. And Earshot is one of those people, folks. So
And you're one of those people, Kimberly. That's why it's a no-brainer to collaborate with you.
yeah,
Honestly, if your activism was shaming and blaming and gaming, I wouldn't be here today because I wouldn't trust you,
yeah, yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So, our very presence on this webinar is proof positive of the impact of your activism.
Amazing. Thank you, Irshad. Can we go back to the gallery view so you can see all of these wonderful people who I'm just going to read some of the comments that came out. LA Smith said, I needed this talk. I've been toxic too. Jeannie said, I not only need to change how I communicate with the world, but how I communicate with myself. Brandy said, such profound wisdom. Thank you. Irshad, go to the gallery view if you don't already see everybody. And I just, I want to be able to, Irshad, folks, is a very busy person, very teaches at Oxford. This has been a really special treat to have Irshad. So can we please give a big AJ thank you to Irshad for
You
this
are
wonderful work today. We really
more than
appreciate it.
welcome. And I thank you all seriously for doing what you can to ease human beings out of our species supremacy complex and into a much more compassionate and ultimately healthy for us way of being. I cannot be more grateful to you all.
Mm.
And as a person of faith, I can only say, God bless you, even if you're an atheist. You know where this is coming from. Bless you, bless you, bless you.
Mm. Thank you, Irshad. Folks, as always, please follow us on social media. Please check out the Moral Courage College. And there is also a free course that moralcourage.org/tools. And that Ina's going to put that in the chat as well. We've kept Ina very busy today. Thank you, Ina.
Thank you so much, Ina.
Oh my goodness. There we go. So folks, make sure that you check out the tools one too. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you. I know this wasn't an easy conversation. I know that we didn't do it perfectly in the chat, but we try to continue to be able to make this a forum where we can discuss some really tough stuff and where we can become more powerful, more connected, more of a loving force in the world for the animals we care so deeply about. Everybody here in this circle today, that is our common ground, and it's pretty damn amazing, powerful common ground. So thank you very much, everybody. Irshad, thank you, everybody. Take care. Take these skills out into the world, and let's do some wonderful good. Take care. Bye.
Bye, everybody.